Hi, in this video we're going to take a quick look at using pivot tables to help us analyze data. Pivot table is just a really quick and easy way to break up large quantities of data that you might have in a spreadsheet and analyze that to find out specific information that you want to extract. So if we were to look at an example spreadsheet here, and this one here has a whole load of data which is just made up. These are all just made up names, so it's not actually anyone's actual data. And so you can see there's a lot of information here. There's about 900 or so rows of data in here, covering quite a lot of individuals. And so if we were trying to take from this specific information and kind of slice that out to look at it a little bit more closely, it could become quite onerous to do that. Now, a pivot table is a tool that you'll find in all spreadsheets really, and that just allows you to kind of automate that process of breaking data up and looking at specific information. And there's lots of other information online about how to use pivot tables if you want to get into more detail. So today's just going to be a quick overview of the process of creating a pivot table, and we'll look at one or two examples of what we might want to find out. So let's just say, for example, that this pupil data we wanted to look at, we were interested in finding out the unauthorized absences by year group. If we went up to the insert button at the top here, you'll see that one of the options we have is a pivot table. And by default, it will assume that you want to select all of the data in your spreadsheet. So we can just leave that as it is. But you can narrow that down if it's just a certain section of data that you want to look at. And it'll ask if you want to insert it to a new sheet or the existing sheet. So we can create a new sheet, and that will add a tab at the bottom here. We'll add a tab here that's got our pivot table in it. So we click create. You'll see that we've now got pivot table 3. You can rename that obviously yourself. And basically, the pivot table allows us to identify specific data that we want and place that into particular rows or columns and essentially kind of compare it against other data that we have and use various different tools, like, for example, sums or averages or so on. And Sheets is quite good at kind of spotting what you might want to look at. So you'll see that at the top here, we actually have some suggested options here. So this is actually guessed that we might want an average of unauthorized absences for each year group. And if you're new to pivot tables and you can't quite figure out how you would add the data to these, or at least, you can obviously click add, but how that would look and what you would put where. It's actually sometimes a good idea just to start by using these suggested ones and seeing how that populates these areas here to understand what's going on. So if we just choose this one here, average of unauthorized absence for each year group, you'll see that what it's done is it's added into the rows the data that we had in the column year group. So it's put that into there. And for the values, it's added the number of unauthorized absences and it's summarized that by an average. So what we can see over here is it's created a table that includes all of our year groups, and it gives us an average of all the unauthorized absence values for each of those year groups. So it's automatically kind of sliced that data up and calculated it for us. And if you were to go and do this manually, it would become quite a kind of time consuming process. Now, say for example, we didn't actually want to look at by year group, we actually wanted to look at that by house. If we get rid of that one there in the rows, we could instead just choose the data for the house, and you'll see that this time it will give us an average for the houses because the values are still recorded as unauthorized absences. And again, if we didn't want to look at unauthorized absences, say for example, this was calculating, which house was winning in a certain number of points, we could choose the row would be our house, but we would go for our values, maybe choose achievement points. And there we can see it will give us some totals that are associated there. Now you can add more data into here, so you can have more than one thing that you're analysing at one time. Pivot tables are really quite a powerful way of breaking data down, but I would say that if you're keen to go into it in more detail, you'd probably want to just experiment a little bit and do a little bit of digging and have a look on YouTube. You'll find lots of really good tutorials for how to make the most of pivot tables that probably go a bit beyond the scope of this kind of quick tutorial to just how you create them. But hopefully it's fairly self-explanatory when you look at it here. So we can just choose to put data in rows, or we can display it in columns instead if we prefer. That's more just a visual preference. We can use rows and columns to cross certain sets of data against each other as well. You can choose in your values here to decide that maybe we didn't want to look at a sum, we wanted to look at an average, and that will calculate a different way of, or it'll be a different way of calculating the values. We've got filters that we can add in as well. So we could filter it by, for example, people with a certain number of conduct points or a specific year group, for example. So if we wanted to find out the average for just a specific year group, we could go in here and we could go and choose, say, let's untick all of these except for year 10 and above. And so having done that, it will show us that data filtered. So hopefully that was a useful intro to pivot tables for you. And if you're interested in them, I would say, as I mentioned before, there's loads of information out there. You're just going to have a wee dig around or just get some data and start playing around with it yourself.